Bonjour tout le monde.
Hello, everyone.
In order and in public. Bienvenue à la réunion numéro 28 du Comité permanent et complet.
Welcome to the Standing Public Accounts Committee 28.
Person in the room and possibly remotely using the Zoom application. Conformément à l'article 108.3G du règlement, le comité entreprend l'examen des rapports du printemps.
Pursuant to Article 1083, the committee is undertaking a review of the 2026 spring reports of the Auditor General of Canada.
The Office of the Auditor General for our first hour. Karen Hogan, Auditor General of Canada, thank you for coming in today and being ready to answer questions on the report. Andrew Hayes, the Deputy Auditor General. Nathalie Chartrand, Principal, nice to see you. Sami Hamouche, nice to see you again. Jean Goulet, bonjour Jean Goulet, bonjour, it's nice to see you as well. Normand Lantier, bonjour. And Gabrielle Lombardi, Principal. And many were principals before as I was saying hello as well, so pardon me. In fact, yes, the 5 of you are principals. All right. Ms. Hogan, you have the floor for up to 5 minutes, but if you decide your introduction needs to be longer, you have the time, or if it's short, that works as well. We have lots of questions for you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. It'll be a little bit more than 5, but I'll try to speak fast.
You go right ahead, and don't rush. Take your time.
D'accord. Bonjour. Merci, Monsieur le Président, et je vous remercie.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair, for giving us this opportunity to testify before the committee today.
Traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I am here today to discuss the findings of 3 audits that were tabled this morning in Parliament. These audits examined how well government organizations are managing important federal initiatives, the replacement of the government's pay system, reforms to the International Student Program, and the RCMP's efforts to recruit police officers. In addition, as is our usual practice, we have also provided Parliament with copies of our special examinations of the Atlantic Pilotage Authority and Via Rail, which were made public since our last tabling. I will begin with our audit of the federal government's project to modernize its pay system. Nous avons conclu que le secrétariat du Conseil du
We concluded that the Treasury Board Secretariat and Public Services Canada manage the pay modernization project to ensure that federal public service will have accurate, timely pay. Some risks were noted at the beginning of the project. The Secretariat and the Department have given that it's at the beginning, they have the opportunity to act to correct them. I'd like to start by 3 elements. First of all, progress made to simplify pay rules was limited. This will require a customization of the Dayforce application costing $4 million per year. Moreover, there's a 133,000 backlog of pay requests, and transferring them could introduce errors into the new system. Finally, the timeline has been shortened by 3 years, shortening at the same time the possibility to eliminate the backlog and to get the project done on time. The department will have to make the decisions quickly as this project moves forward.
And Citizenship Canada reduced the number of new study permits issued, but fell short in other key areas. In 2024, the department issued just under 150,000 permits, well below the forecast of 350,000. Some provinces, particularly those with smaller populations, were disproportionately affected. For example, Newfoundland and Labrador and Saskatchewan were both expected to see an increase of 10% in approved study permits compared to 2023, but instead experienced a decrease of at least 59%. While the department introduced a tool to verify acceptance letters from learning institutions, it did not effectively investigate or follow up on high-risk cases. Over 153,000 potential cases of non-compliance with study permits were identified, but the department investigated only a small number. It also did not pursue 800 cases involving fraud discovered after permits were approved. In most of these cases, individuals went on to apply for other immigration permits while in Canada, and more than half of them have since been approved. Overall, the department needs to act on the information it has to address integrity concerns in the program. En ce qui concerne le recrutement de la Gendarmerie royale du Canada,
With regard to RCMP recruitment, the audit concluded that the RCMP did not recruit enough police members to respond to its needs. The recruitment target set by the RCMP was lower than the needs and was not met. Major delays in application processing slowed down recruiting. The RCMP did not respect processing time for 97% of applications. In September 2025, there were 3,400 too few police officers. This trend was generalized across Canada, especially in contract and Indigenous policing services. The number of vacancies was critical in 9 out of 11 provinces and territories served by the RCMP. A flexible recruiting system drew thousands of candidates, but there were nonetheless shortfalls in many regions. The RCMP should better define its need for new recruits and set targets to meet them.
Of careful planning and timely action to address risks. Without these elements, there can be delays and unintended impacts that stand in the way of positive outcomes for Canada. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening remarks. We'd be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have time for 2 full rounds today. The first one will consist of 3 members, 6 minutes each, and then another round of 5 minutes with various times. Ms. Kusi, and that will take us to about the top of the hour, noon, or just a few minutes after. I know you've got a busy day, Auditor, so we will endeavor to move this along quickly. Ms. Kusi, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And again, thank you very much, Auditor General, for your excellent work. The system that you are referring to in the report today costs Canadians a minimum of $4.2 billion. Yet your key finding indicates the need to simplify and standardize pay rules before introducing a new system was a core lesson learned from the transition to the Phoenix pay system. Yet it's concerning to you, a decade later, there is little progress made to simplify these rules, and that customizing the new pay system is costing taxpayers an additional $4 million a year. How could this have been avoided?
Well, I think that's a great question to go ask Treasury Board Secretariat and Public Service and Procurement Canada. When we came in here, we were just trying to see if they had acted on lessons learned. And one of those key areas is simplifying pay rules and standardizing pay processes. We did see one simplification agreed to with unions, but there's a lot of work left to be done. As a result, however, the mitigation measure is to customize Dayforce so that they can avoid payers in the future. I think there needs to be an effort put on by all parties involved to make sure that everyone is being paid accurately and on time. How they go about doing that, I'll leave to the central agencies and the unions, but it's clear that if you don't simplify, you need to at least customize to make sure pay is accurate.
Yet despite all of these customizations for $4 million a year, manual workarounds are still required. Why would this be, despite $4 million a year for customizations, that manual workarounds would still be necessitated?
I think the Dayforce system is not just about replacing the Phoenix pay system. So it's not just the box that handles pay. It's also replacing HR management systems. There are about 30 different ones across the departments that are serviced by Miramichi Pay Center. So this is a more end-to-end from onboarding to paying. So it isn't just about pay. So there'll always be processes before you get to the pay system. And it's about making sure that all of them have been standardized as well. And we saw some progress on standardization. No department is adopting that until they get onto day 4. So it is too soon to know the impact it will have on treating pay.
In fiscal year 2024-2025, 29% of normal and acting pay payments had errors within them. Do you think 29% is an acceptable rate for a pay system and for this government?
I think every employee expects to be paid accurately and on time. The number that you raise is the figure that we identified during our financial audit work for the Government of Canada. We've seen over years, because we've been tracking that every year, that it ebbs and flows. And that's why it's important in my mind to make sure that you have simplified the pay rules and standardized processes, cleared up all of these pay errors before you move a department onto the new Dayforce system. Because if you bring a pay over with errors, doesn't matter what system is processing it, there will be errors again.
Your report indicates that in 2023, Public Services and Procurement Canada set a target to eliminate all pay transactions that were 1 year or older by March 2026. Since then, the department's internal reports through September 2025 indicated it would not meet the target. How can Canadians have confidence in a government that once again can't even meet their own targets?
One of the concerns and risks that we flagged with this project. It is clear that progress is being made on the backlog. We're seeing it decline, but what's concerning is the age of it. More than 50% of what's in there is more than 2 years old. At least 16,000 pay action requests are more than 6 years old. And it's those older ones that in my mind will be more complex to solve the longer you go out. That will take more time, and that's why we flagged a very big risk of shortening the timelines. And I would expect that Treasury Board Secretariat and Public Service and Procurement Canada are going to adjust their way forward because you need time to make sure that pay is accurate before you move it into the new system.
Was there any evidence at all that the government is considering the future implications of CER and the additional pressure that this will put on the system?
Well, I think that's one of the elements that I would call an emerging risk, right? So there's risks right now that are known, and then there's obviously an emerging risk that comprehensive expenditure review and early retirement incentives will all have pressure on pay and clearing out the backlog. So this is one of those key elements that I think needs to be factored in right now that will require a lot of diligence. It's not just identified risks, but also emerging risks that need to be monitored and mitigated throughout a big project like this.
In the report, you mentioned the corporation Russ Gilroy that was retained for work on the Phoenix project. Do you have any information as to how that company was retained?
I unfortunately do not know how Goss Gilroy was retained, but I did look at their report, and many of their findings and concerns or recommendations echo some from my office back in 2018 and some that we're flagging right now. I think whenever you have a big project like this, there's a risk that you'll prioritize timelines over functionality and costs, and it's important to make sure that people are paid accurately, and that's why a key step is to clear out all of this backlog before transition happens, and that's a risk I hope the government will monitor closely and adjust as needed so that they can meet the accelerated time frame.
Thank you, Merci beaucoup. Thank you, Ms. Kuzi. Ms. Yip, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Hogan, and to your entire team for the good and productive work of these spring reports. Your work is always very important for us to improve. Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to be asking you some questions on the RCMP report. Why did the RCMP fail to recruit enough police officers to meet operational needs?
Well, I think the biggest reason would be the slowness at which they process applications that they received. It isn't a shortage of interest in the RCMP, but there is only 6% of the applications received over the 30 months of our audit that made it to being an offer of going to basic training. So there are a lot of applications, about 40% of them, that individuals either withdrew their application or stopped communicating with the RCMP, likely because of the length of time. The RCMP has a service standard that says an application should be processed in 224 days, and we found that on average it was taking 330 days. So really speeding that up will need to be an important step in order to increase the number of recruits that make it through. I think the last item I would raise about this is starting with knowing your needs is essential. And right now, the needs or the targets they were setting for recruitment were set based on how many people they could train. And that was falling well short of their actual needs. We believe they need at least 3,400 police officers. If they think about where their vacancies are and attrition, you have to factor all that in, and so they're setting a target just too low for what they need right now.
Was there anything that you felt they could do to speed up the application process?
Oh, it's a great question. Actually, a good conversation I had with the commissioner myself around how do you adjust this. We identified a couple of areas that we thought might have been contributing to this, one being that there is a recruiting analyst that sort of picks up a file and moves it through the 7 steps. Most of those positions, or half of those positions, are sitting vacant right now, so that will be a contributing factor. But we also talked about how many of the steps are done one after the other for the most part. So there's an opportunity to do them together sequentially, but also, or concurrently, I should say, but also to do them in a different order, right? Identify where most are being eliminated from the process and see if you can move that up. For example, the medical or physical exams and security clearances. So if those can be moved up, that could probably speed up the process. So I think there's lots of opportunities, and the commissioner has already, I think, spoken publicly about how he's hired a third party to help them work on this, and their goal is to reduce that timeline to 6 months. If they do that, as we mentioned in our report, make sure that you change your service standard by step so you can measure whether your efforts are being successful or not.
6 months is still a long time.
Well, I think if you're looking for a job, waiting any amount of time is a long time, but 330 days is very long. So 6 months would be an improvement for sure.
That is true. Why was the recruiting officer the one that reviews the 7 steps? Why were so many of that particular position vacant? Did they give a reason?
I'm not sure that I know the answer to that. I think that would be a good question for the RCMP, but what we did see is that there is a fall-on effect from not having enough frontline police officers. So we really focused in on those who service Canadians on a day-to-day, but many of those experienced officers move into other areas of the RCMP, whether it be federal policing, special services, or even their internal services. And so when you have a high vacancy rate in one, you tend to have a high vacancy rate all over the organization. So I think that's something they need to prioritize where their resources are used.
In your report, it mentions that analysis of the RCMP's data shows that the shortage of police officers has worsened in the last 2 years. Why is that?
Well, I think I would highlight the 2 elements that I raised already. One being how long it takes to process an application. The majority of frontline police officers come through the contract and Indigenous policing business line. And they changed their focus to really look at the vacancies there. But many of those officers, once they're experienced, move to other areas. And so when you don't have a clear picture of what your needs are across the entire organization, you're really only targeting to meet the needs of one business line, you're falling short. So I think there's many elements that have contributed, but the RCMP tried out measures to try and increase that. They put in place a flexible posting plan. And while that posting plan really attracted thousands more applications than they expected, it had an unintended consequence of seeing new police officers pick the province or territory they wanted to work in, so the coasts of the country, and then you saw vacancies in the rest of the country increase. They've since decided to repeal that, so draw it back. But I think this is why it's important to make sure that you measure whether all of your efforts are having the intended impact that you wanted.
Thank you. That is your time. Monsieur, suivant, c'est Michel Lemire, s'il vous plaît, pour 6 minutes.
Monsieur Lemire, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Madam Auditor General, for your very rigorous reports, and thanks once again to the entire team. A little background, first of all, to talk about Dayforce. Phoenix was put into place in 2016. It was assessed to be over $200 million in cost, and now we're close to $5 billion, and only $2 billion went to problem solving with Phoenix, that is. That's taxpayer money. In 2019, we knew that Phoenix had problems and was not the software of the future. A new contract was signed in 2019 with Dayforce at $57 million. Last June, Minister Joël Lightbound announced a $350 million contract with Dayforce, and there would be a possibility of renewal for 20 years. In your report, the costs are already assessed at $560 million, an additional $200 million, that is, than what was expected. And the entire project will cost $4.2 billion. Is that the reading that we should have of the federal government's pay systems? You gave a lot of numbers. I think it's important to remember that the current costs, over $500 million, are not just the cost of the contract, but the cost of internal, that is, government services in this contract. Obviously, when there's a preliminary estimate, one expects that the costs will arise because of more detail that comes as the contract continues. The government needs to look closely at the costs with the third party and also what Phoenix currently costs them and how much pay processing will cost with Dayforce. This is what should be determined whether the costs have gone down with a new pay system. Now, we're talking about a $4.2 billion estimate. Does that include supplementary funding beyond the $565 million? The cost of the project, currently estimated at $4.2 billion, does include spending that has already occurred. Spending by the departments, that is. It's nonetheless a rough estimate and does not include, in my opinion, a very, very important expense. That is the cost of transitioning to this new system for all departments and agencies. Currently, we're just looking at the cost of the system and the central agencies that are included in that amount. We know that to bring 49 departments into that system, we still do not have the rough estimate of the transition costs, and we're already at $4.2 billion. Currently, 49 departments are handled by the Miramichi Pay Center, but there are also other departments and agencies under Phoenix that will transition to Dayforce. So in all, there's some 100 organizations that will have to make this transition. On page 14, paragraph 31 in your report, there is a detailed estimate of the costs to be submitted to the Treasury Board Secretariat. These preliminary costs, the projected costs, budgeted to the tune of $2 billion extra, you're saying that already it will cost more. There will be more costs than for what has already been spent. You're talking about the cost of the project versus the funding by the Treasury Board Secretariat. There have been funding tranches, and these the figures have to constantly be updated so that other tranches of money are given. The $4.2 billion does not include the cost of all the departments integrating into Dayforce. We recommend that there be a full understanding of this cost of transition to Dayforce, not just for the central agency, the cost of the central agencies. So there is a tremendous challenge for the government to assess the cost. Every year the costs go up. There are fewer and fewer operational competencies within the government. Have you assessed the amount per operation and how it contributes to the overall cost for the government? No, we're still at the beginning of the project. Currently, we wanted to see if we could find recommendations to improve the project and prevent another Phoenix from occurring. It's still too early to assess all the contracts, the third-party contracts that is, but one of the recommendations we made is that the government conduct an assessment right now to figure out how much their pay system costs so it can compare to the new system. Because, of course, the idea is to reduce the cost of pay processing. The target needs to be set. The information needs to be found already. You said it's too early, but I think that for Minister McKinnon, it will be too early and there will be cost overruns.
Times. Monsieur Deltel, s'il vous plaît, pour 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, collègues.
You have 5 minutes. Hello. Welcome to the committee. Once again, excellent reports. Thank you, Ms. Hogan, and all your team. You've raised concerns, among other, the Dayforce program that reminds us, sadly, of the Phoenix tragedy. And it is a tragedy because we're talking about hundreds of thousands of Canadian families who have suffered and gone through tragedies because of Phoenix tragedies. In 2015, before it was implemented, we stopped its production so that it would go well, and yet the green light was given, and we know that it became a real tragedy. Now, when it comes to Dayforce, Dayforce aims to have simplified pay rules. The problem, Ms. Hogan says, is that you said 10 years later, the work done to simplify the rules is fairly limited, and ultimately the simplification will cost more. What do you mean by that?
Le secrétaire du Conseil du Trésor, ils ont une...
This is a question that should be asked of the Treasury Board Secretariat. There is an agreement with the union to negotiate and agree on simplified pay rules. Some simplification has been done since Phoenix, but I believe that all parties believe that paying public servants accurately and in a timely manner is the goal. When there's a lack of simplification, there is nonetheless a control of attenuation management, a certain mitigation measures. In 2024 and 2025, 29% of pays were wrong. And for federal public workers, that means 1 out of every 3 paychecks was wrong. How can that be? Well, since the Phoenix transition, my office has been checking the pay services every single year. And in 2025, we remarked that 29% of public service workers have pay errors. The source of the errors is really data entered incorrectly or too late. That's why it's so important to understand that this is a shared task. Pay processing involves all the agencies and departments working with the central agencies. That's why it's so important to get through this backlog of pay problems. When we transition, we need to the new pay system, we need to be sure that this backlog is done. There will still be errors, of course. There will always be pay errors. But I think the risk now is that the central agency is that there are risks that the central agencies have to manage and mitigate. And for anyone working in the federal system, including your team and you yourself, should we be more worried? Currently, most public service workers are paid accurately. But we decided to carry out this audit because we don't want there to be a repeat of the shortcomings and errors that we saw with Phoenix. We raised red flags for risks that must be better managed. We'll be doing follow-up, very close follow-up, to support the government in its payment of its employees in a timely and accurate manner. I'd like to talk to you about another report regarding the international students. We understood that much information has been forgotten. Is it because of the challenges posed by immigration and border services or permits that there are people working in silos, government services done in silo? You've raised some very important points. Better collaboration with provinces and post-secondary institutions to manage the assignment of permits, as well as better information sharing between the Minister of Immigration and the Minister of Border Services would help. There are concerns that are raised during application processing, and it would be interesting to see better collaboration within the government and with the provinces, territories, and teaching institutions.
Mr. Dirksen, please, for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and great job on these reports. Thanks so much for your hard work on them. I am going to continue talking about the pay modernization. There's some indications that departments are on the right track, but you've certainly articulated concerns you have over the shortened timeline, for example, and also balancing priorities of scheduling with pay processes. In your report, I understand that the number of pay transactions older than a year has been reduced by 50% over the last 2 years, but you've expressed concerns with the pace being adequate enough to address the remaining backlog. So I'll ask, do you see opportunities to increase pace without sacrificing process integrity?
Well, I mean, that's a tough question because I think the backlog has gone down when you look at it year over year, and we've given you a great chart in the report to look at it. But concerning is that more than 50% of what remains is more than 2 years old. and about 16,000 pay transactions are more than 6 years old. Those will take longer to treat and resolve than something that just came in the last 6 months or so. So I am concerned that those older ones don't seem to be clearing up, and that will take some time, and that's why shortening the time frame is a concern. We did see in the audit where they prioritized the departments that are going to be in the first wave of adopting Dayforce, and that's a good practice. They still have a lot of work, however, to do. They still have pay transactions to clear, and recognizing that every single day there will be more that get added, right? Pay is a very evolving item, and if you don't tackle them quickly, they do become things that sit around that take a really long time and may be complex. Many of those individuals may no longer work for the public service, so it's going to be really difficult, I think, to resolve some of those older things, and it'll be a right balance. It'll probably take some resources, but it will be about prioritizing, what you treat first.
Okay, yeah, so one of the issues that I believe you identified as having contributed to the inefficiencies and the backlogs in the old system is the quality of data. So I understand that the departments, PSPC and TBS, have taken some steps to improve quality of data and the data management. Can you provide us your evaluation on if those improvements on data management are going to be adequate?
So I'm not sure that I looked at all of them, but I think what I would point to is about standardizations of processes. So you do need to have all the departments and agencies who are part of this, right? Pay is not just a black box that gives you your paycheck. It is a whole, from onboarding and any change in your life to your pay. So it does need departments and agencies to be involved. So that whole HR to pay process is important. They've identified about 200 processes that could be standardized, and they've, for example, what would go in a letter of offer, making sure every letter of offer has the same things that are needed within the pay system so that you're not missing it. But departments only need to adopt those standardized processes when they shift. So I think there's an opportunity to look at the timing of that, and is there merit in maybe starting to standardize things now so that not everyone is rushing, right? These are all elements that I would expect are considered now that the decision was made to shorten the timeline to transition. And that's why we're so early on that we could at least say these are concerns and make sure you think about them as you move forward.
Yeah, you touch on something important there about the, one hand talking to the other within departments, and that's a concept that's come up a few times today about the siloing and the isolation that some departments work within. So based on the necessity of integration between the central agencies and departments and the siloing of estimated costs and the way the federal government, sometimes it just works that way, right? For better or worse. Would you say this is a result of kind of a systemic a culture, like a culture of systems? Have you seen any programs that have successfully unsiloed and taken a broader canvas of potential costs and impacts?
Oh, you're going to make Andrew and I think about that. If we've seen something that has successfully unsiloed, I think this is definitely an opportunity to try and do different, which is why some of our recommendations have been made to think about this more globally. I think what I would encourage every public servant to do when they work on a project is not to think about my department, my deputy head, who am I accountable for, my budget, but to take the look of a Canadian. A Canadian looks at the federal government and just sees one organization, not the many little silos that we function in. So if we started to think that way, then maybe we would plan differently and cost differently. And that's why some of the recommendations we issued were meant to really challenge thinking the old way so that we don't repeat Phoenix.
And that is your time, I'm afraid. Suivant encore une fois, c'est M. Lemire pour 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Lemire, you have 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Thank you, Chair. Ms. Hogan, I'd like to understand patterns in the federal government's IT services. This week, there was an article in La Presse discussing Quorum. It states that in 5 or 6 years, when the program is done, there will still not be a proper understanding of the cost. with regard to Arrive Can. 4 people received $330 million. We understand that there was some abuse or misconduct, perhaps, with regard to the whole process. IT projects always have cost overruns. Ottawa accepts this and does not know how much Curram will cost. Do you agree that with all IT projects, there is a problem, that the initial cost estimates are not well done, and that we can therefore expect that these projects, that Dayforce rather, will cost way more than the $4.2 billion currently estimated? It's not only with IT projects that we see major shortcomings in the rough initial estimates. Yes, of course, in IT projects as well, but I would point out, or I would say rather, that sometimes preliminary estimates are simply preliminary. They're set up to rapidly receive funding and better determine the costs after. However, as we've noted here with Dayforce, there are major costs that aren't necessarily included in a rough estimate, and there need to be adjustments. Sometimes a lack of understanding of the complexity of the service or tool requested is the problem, and there may also be changing requirements over time. Arrive Can was one example of this. Requirements at the borders changed during the pandemic, and many things can contribute to complexity, but there's still that need to have an overall idea at the beginning that is often identified as lacking in projects in general. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lemire.
I think we're going to split the time here. Mr. Couric, would you like to kick it off, or is it Mr. Stevenson? Mr. Couric, you have would you like me to interrupt halfway through, or are you going to hand over
if you
to your
could,
colleague?
I have my timer on, but if you could interrupt, that'd
I'll
be great.
notify you when you're halfway through your time.
Thank you, everybody, for attending today, and thank you for your very detailed reports. I'll be starting on the International Student Program reforms. So between 2023 and 2024, we had 153,000 students that were identified as potentially non-compliant. Now, in your report, you stated because of budget issues, only 2,000 were able to be looked at annually. So a total of 4,000 and change cases were looked at. So is it to my understanding that roughly around 49,000 potentially non-compliant cases were not looked at?
Yes, that's the figures that the department gave us, is they only had funding to look at a little over 4,000, which means the others were not investigated. But I think what's concerning for me is when they did investigate the 4,000 is about 40% of them were closed. Those cases were closed, but it was because the students stopped communicating with the immigration department. And I would have expected that they would have taken that all the way to the end to determine whether or not a student was meeting the terms of the permit. Remember that these are just students being flagged as potentially non-compliant. You need to give them an opportunity to demonstrate that they are studying full-time.
Okay, thank you. Also here, so your audit examined nearly 550,000 individuals whose study permits expired in 2024. You identified, or there was identified, 39,500 individuals who could no longer be in Canada because they did not have immigration status. Where was this 39,000? How did we get that number?
So I think this is one of the examples that I cited about immigration department not acting on the information that it had. Study permits have an expiry date, and they were not putting together a list of students who had expired permits to assess what was happening. So our audit team worked with them to determine how many students had expired permits, and then to find out whether...
Sorry, just to make that clear. So it was your team who compiled that list, not immigration. So you found the error, and your team, on top of doing the audit list or this audit, actually assisted them in helping and put together this list.
Correct. We worked with them closely to go through their database and identify all the students with expired permits. The next step was then to assess whether or not they had applied for any other immigration permit, and that's where we ended up with our list of a little over 39,000 students. We then took that list and went to the Canada Border Services Agency and asked them to confirm if individuals had left the country. The result is about 40% had. Now it's up to the Immigration Department and Border Services to decide what to do with the remaining individuals and take action as they deem necessary.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Stevenson, you have just over 2 minutes. You have the floor.
Thank you. I believe that there's a bit of a romantic affiliation or feeling towards our RCMP and the general public, but I don't think they necessarily agree with all of our bureaucratic problems that we might have going forward. I see at the back of your report, there's a lot of the recommendations, and then there's responses from the RCMP. And almost every single one of them, they say, oh, yeah, we agree, and we're going to do something in this regards, or we're going to try and fix it. When I guess I'm going to ask whether or not you feel that their responses are going to equate to the actual actions, like their words are going to match the actions when they didn't have some of the goals. Because didn't you say that earlier that when they came up with their goals as to how many people, because we've got this massive shortage in recruitment of officers, and their goals were not to fill those positions that we figured that they need, but their goal was to match how many they actually had to the funding that they figured they could place on that.
I think there's two parts to your question.
Yeah.
The first would be recommendations. I believe that a response to a recommendation should have a statement of agreement or not, and a clear timeline and some clear actions. So the RCMP could have given us better responses, but this is where I encourage the Public Accounts Committee to invite them to study our report, and then they will be required to give you a detailed action plan. So that would be my recommendation on the responses. When it comes to identifying their needs, they set a target to recruit 1,280 police officers based on what they believed they could train, the funding and the ability they had to train them. That number is well short of what they need, and so you're not even aiming to recruit to meet your needs.
Yeah, can I just get a little more detail on that and how they came up with that number? Because in the report, it came out that it says 247,000 is the figure that it costs to recruit and train an RCMP officer. But we had a discussion earlier about how there's fixed costs and there's a per member cost in some of those. And so when they're doing this, calculating out that they can only do this, it's much more efficient if they actually had their full training amounts to get those people trained, because then those fixed costs would actually go down. So our per recruit costs would probably go down. Is that not correct?
Absolutely. The per recruit costs would go down if you could fill up the training classes and then graduate more cadets out of there. So the cost, the way they determined the 1,280 was what they have as capacity. So what they have at depot. And how many they could put through there. You already have a trainer. You have a classroom. So if you
and they said that their maximum per year is 1,600 that they could probably do, but they're significantly less than that. And you'd said in
Mr.
your earlier...
just a very quick question. Your time is up. So
okay.
If you want to ask...
I was just going to ask about where the bottleneck is in the application process that needs to be improved the most.
Bottleneck starts for sure with the fact that it takes 330 days on average to process an application. And if you tackle that, you'll increase that. But eventually, you'll need capacity to train.
Thank you. And then lastly, Mr. McKinnon, you have the floor for 5 minutes. If you...
And thank you all for being here, and thank you for your diligent work on all these files, all of you. I'm going to go back to bottlenecks, but I'm going to pay system again. So progress to simplify and standardize pay rules and processes has been limited. Is there any particular bottleneck, any particular impediment to making progress in this area?
Well, I mean, I think it's in everyone's best interest to make sure public servants are paid on time and accurately, and how the government goes about doing that to simplify pay rules is up to them. Right now, it is trying to work with the unions to negotiate and figure that out. There's been one element that was worked on, and they're still working on fixing other simplifications. There is a memorandum of understanding that's been signed between Treasury Board and the unions, so that this can be done even between collective bargainings, right? I think everyone's goal is just to try and avoid many pay errors once we move to the new system. So I think it's definitely a great question for Treasury Board, one that I can't tell you why it's slowed down, but they have made limited change, and as a result, customization is needed, which comes with an annual cost.
So, if I understand, you're not saying that it's a lack of resources on the government side. It's more about negotiations with the unions and
know why they haven't made progress. I don't typically talk about what the central agencies and unions discuss. I can just give you the facts that they wanted to simplify pay rules, and there's been very few done. So as a result of mitigation strategies in place, which is customizing Dayforce to compensate for those.
Any particular department that is more problematic than others?
In terms of complexity of payrolls?
Well, in making some progress on
Oh, again, I have no clue. I think that would be a question for Treasury Board Secretariat as to what have they been trying to simplify. But I think they're looking at bigger, broader things, sort of how acting pay is handled across the public service. And that's not unique to one department. That is something that is bigger and broader across the public service. I guess finding out what their priorities would be, what they're trying to focus in on first, would be a great way to know whether or not there has been a particular department that's slowing this down.
But I understand this is going to be critical going forward with the Dayforce system. I guess perhaps you could sketch the timeline of how that system is developing and where it is?
Well, I'm not usually one to guess. What I can tell you is what the government's put out as their timeline. They had a plan to transition all of the departments by 2034. They shortened that by 3 years in January of this year, so now they want to do it by 2031. The first 3 departments are expected to transition in 2027. And so what we're seeing different here from Phoenix is there is a small wave at the beginning, and then I would expect to see some adjustments made. And that's why it's important to have a lot of vigilance around monitoring the existing risks that they know and that we have flagged in this audit, but then emerging risks, risks that may come because of reductions because of the comprehensive expenditure review or for early retirement. All of those will add to pay transactions and complexity, and they need to be factored into timelines as you move forward.
So I understand the transition is going to be not one fell swoop, but it's going to be gradual, few departments at a time. So
definitely different than what we saw back in 2016.
Okay. So these changes in pay rules and such could be done as they transition into the new system on a department-wise basis? Department by department basis?
Well, I think it's a little more complex than that because of how the collective agreements work. It isn't as simple as just simplifying a payroll and then fixing it. It'll be about when all the collective agreements get renewed and how it gets impacted. So simplification is not simple, unfortunately, with payrolls.
So a lot of this complexity in the payrolls and processes is wrapped up in in agreements with unions and so forth?
Well, complexity is in some of the collective agreements around pay rules, but the complexity of the processes is well within the government's control. Dayforce is also replacing about 30 HR management systems. This is one government, and across 49 departments, there's 30 different 30 HR management systems. So standardizing that and will help as well, right? So I think there are really two ways of going about making HR to pay simpler. It's not just pay rules, but it's also about all the processes within the federal public service.
Thank you. I believe that's my time.
You last small question, or are you done, Mr. McKinnon?
Well, I was going to say that since the processes are within the purview of the government to do, it's not a matter of negotiation. Is there any particular bottleneck there that we can talk about?
So I'm not sure about a bottleneck. I think it was a decision made on timing. The government had identified about 250,000 processes that they wanted to standardize across the public service. They've made progress on almost 200 of those, but no department is expected to adopt these new standardized processes until they migrate over to Dayforce. So again, that might be something they want to think about, whether there's merit in doing that earlier. No, 250 different HR to pay processes.
I was scared there. Okay.
That's okay. But it just shows you how complex it is and how it's really a shared responsibility between departments and agencies, as well as the central agencies that manage the actual pay system, to make sure that employees are paid accurately and on time. Well, we're on the right path right now, but there are still many public servants who have been underpaid or overpaid and need corrections to their pay. So clearing out that backlog, especially the older ones, is critical.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank all the witnesses from the Office of the Auditor General for your testimony and participation in relation to the 2026 Spring Reports of the Auditor General of Canada. Of course, we'll see you back for additional studies in the coming weeks and months. This brings us to the end of our first hour. I'll suspend briefly to bring in our next panel. We'll reconvene in about 5 minutes. Again, thank you very much. You are excused. This meeting is suspended. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for settling in so quickly. Conformément à l'article de renvoi du lundi 9 février 2025, le comité reprend l'examen du projet de loi
To the articles
C200.
of reference of Monday, February 9th, 2026, Bill C-230, an act to amend the Financial Administration Act and to make consequential amendments to other acts. The committee will continue to its clause-by-clause consideration.
Questions members might have during the clause-by-clause consideration. I'll just go through and introduce everyone from the three departments. First, from the Canada Revenue Agency, Isabelle Brault, Director General, Legislative Policy Directorate, Legislative Policy and Regulatory Affairs Branch. Jennifer Bowdens, I'm sorry, Jennifer. Jennifer Bowdens, Acting Director General, Finance and Administration Branch. If I don't get it right, you'll have everyone echoing my mistake here, so thank you. And then Charlie Norris, Acting Director General, Collections and Verification Branch. From the Treasury Board Secretariat, Tomas Papiel, Senior Director, Financial Management Policy, and Ralph Jabor, Director, Financial Management Policy. And then, of course, from the Department of Finance, Lachlan McEachern, that's a very maritime name, Acting Director General, Legislation, Tax Policy Branch. Welcome, and thank you for coming in today and lending us your views and expertise if it's called upon. So I'd like to provide members of the committee with a few comments on how committees proceed with the clause-by-clause consideration of a bill. As the name indicates, this is an examination of all the clauses in the order in which they appear in the bill. I will call each clause successively, and each clause is subject to debate and a vote. If there are any amendments to the clause in question, I will recognize the member proposing it who may explain it. I think that should be will explain it, because I'm sure every member will be speaking to it just to enlighten the other members. The amendment, of course, will be open for debate. When no further members wish to intervene, the amendment will be voted on. Amendments will be considered in the order in which they appear in the package each member received from the clerk. Since this is a first exercise for many new members, I'll go slowly to allow all members to follow the proceedings properly. If we get it done today, great. If not, I have scheduled time after the Easter recess. Amendments have been given a number. It's in the top right corner on each page to indicate which party submitted them. During debate and on amendment, members are permitted to move sub-amendments. When a sub-amendment is moved to an amendment, it is voted on first. Then another sub-amendment may be moved, or the committee may consider the main amendment and vote on it. I thank the members for their attention and wish everyone a productive clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-230. So I am first going to call on Clause 1. Terminology is a little different here from when we look at reports. Clause 1 basically refers to the first, I want to say paragraph, but that doesn't quite capture it. I guess it refers to the first clause, so there you are. So, G1 is the first amendment, and I believe Mr. Turnbull will be moving that and may speak to it.
Thank you, Chair, and good to be here with my colleagues, and congratulations to Mr. Chambers on a private member's bill that I think will make a contribution to transparency in Canada. And I think, you know, with some amendments that the government has proposed, we're prepared to reasonably debate this and support the bill. And so I want to start by just, you know, saying kudos to, it's a big deal when you have a private member's bill and you propose something and, you know, you get parties working together, and it's really what this place is supposed to be about, and it's really great to see Mr. Chambers making a contribution. So that's as probably nice as I'll be, Chair, but yeah, I'll give you a testimonial later, assuming we get through this. So G1, I'm going to move that Bill C-230 in Clause 1 be amended. A, by replacing line 8 on page 1 with the following. Online searchable database containing information relating to. B, by replacing line 10 on page 1 with the following. Quote, penny, which is the tail end of company, I assume, or partnership to His Majesty and to any claim by, end quote. C, by replacing lines 12 to 18 on page 1 with the following. Quote, partnership dash that was in whole or in part remitted, forgiven, written off, or waived under this or any other act of Parliament in an amount of 5 million or more. And I'll just speak to this or motivate it, as we say. I think Mr. Chambers' original intent was to set the threshold at $1 million. Government has thought about this, feel, I think, strongly that a $5 million threshold would, align with, I think, the principle of materiality, which is to, reduce administrative burden and focus on what matters. These are higher profile deletions than just $1 million. So it, I think, just targets, it makes sure that maybe SMEs don't get caught up in this. I don't think, an SME that, earns a couple $1 million a year and doesn't file their taxes and perhaps goes out of business is, gets behind on things is not necessarily the target for this. But obviously we can debate that. I think it also, a 5 million threshold would align with best practices in the G7 and the OECD peers. And again, it would potentially reduce risk of small to medium-sized enterprises getting captured in the registry. So for those reasons, this is why we're suggesting to raise the threshold to 5 million. And hope that we'll get the support of all members on the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a clerical note, which is important. Puis Monsieur Lemire aussi, I just want to be very clear on this. So if G1 is adopted, the next amendment, BQ1, cannot be moved due to a line conflict. As House of Commons Procedure and Practices 4th edition states in section 16.71, and I quote, once a line of a clause has been amended by the committee, it cannot be further amended by a subsequent amendment as a given line may be amended only once, end quote. So there are two amendments that this could impact right off the bat. So I just wanted to make sure everyone was clear on that. It might determine how you vote, but if this amendment is moved on, we will then, if it's passed, that is, if it is approved by the committee, we will then not deal with BQ1 and G. Oh, and that's it. Okay. Pardon me. All right. So the debate is now open. Are there any speakers to Mr. Turnbull's G1? Yes, Mr. Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate this. I think this is a first for the committee for some time, so I appreciate you going slowly. I welcome the suggestions from the government, of course, but to give some just additional context, the $1 million threshold was intended to, one, be easy to communicate, number one, but number two, to not produce a list that was thousands of names long, but in the low hundreds. I believe in an effort to be reasonable, I think there's probably a middle ground, if I'll call it. At a threshold of $2 million, the list could be anywhere between, I looked at previous years, about 100 to 150 names long, as I understand. To me, that's not a unreasonable number of entities. I still think that there are arguments to lower the threshold, but I recognize that there is materiality. But at the end of the day, if an entity, no matter whether they're large or small, does trigger the threshold, I think it's an important measure of public transparency that information is known to taxpayers, but effectively also to parliamentarians. So, while I would strongly prefer to keep a $1 million threshold. I do think, in an effort to be collaborative with the government to understand where they're coming from, that I'd be open to considering something slightly less than 5 million.
So, Mr. Chambers, are you moving a sub-amendment with a figure in mind, or are you gonna leave that?
I'm not sure I'm allowed to do that. But
all right, then you'll have to leave it for one of your colleagues. Yes, Ms. Kuzi.
I will so move the sub-amendment to 2 million. Thank you.
All right, so we're now debating the sub-amendment to set the threshold at 2 million for the disclosure. Oui, Monsieur Lemire.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Lemire, thank you, Chair. I would have liked it to be kept at 1 million. I understand the spirit of compromise, and so I will be supporting the amendment.
I'm seeing, Ms. Turnbull, do you?
Well, I appreciate the attempt here to find a middle ground, as Mr. Chambers had said, and I think although we preferred a $5 million threshold, I think the number, as Mr. Chambers has indicated, that would be disclosed in terms of companies or partnerships or trusts, I think is a reasonable number. So I think we're prepared to support the sub-amendment.
Okay, so I'm hearing agreement. Is it agreed that the sub-amendment at the $2 million threshold is passed and approved? I need to hear yeses, or I'm going to have to call a roll call vote. Yes, all right.
Yes.
I declare that passed. Oui, très bien, Monsieur Lemire. Oui.
Very good, Mr. Lemire, yes.
To G1 as amended, 2 million at the $2 million threshold. Any debate around that? Canvass the room. I'm seeing none. Is G1 then approved by this committee as amended with the $2 million threshold?
Yes.
Yes, I declare that passed as well. All right. Just bear with me for a second. Now we're turning to G2. Mr. Turnbull, I'll recognize you again.
Thank you, Chair. And I understand that BQ1 had a line conflict, so was not admissible. Okay, thank you very much. So I will move the following amendment. It's G2 in your package. That Bill C-230 in Clause 1 be amended by replacing line 22 on page 1 to line 7 on page 2 with the following. Quote, poration, comma, trust company or partnership, semicolon, B, the amount that was remitted, forgiven, written off, or waived, semicolon, C, an indication of whether the debt, obligation, or claim was remitted, forgiven, written off, or waived, D, the fiscal year in which the debt, obligation, or claim was remitted, forgiven, written off, or waived, E, the act of parliament or agreement, arrangement, contract, or other instrument or act under which the debt, obligation, or claim arose. F, the act of parliament under which the debt, obligation, or claim was remitted, forgiven, written off, or waived. And G, any other information that the President of the Treasury Board considers appropriate, end quote. So if I may just motivate this a little bit with some supporting arguments, I think this adds more information to the proposed registry. It increases transparency. I think it reduces the risk of misinterpretation. And I think it just adds some extra clarity. I'm conscious always of what we disclose to the public, how they may interpret that. And I think in this case, having the amount, an indication of whether the debt, obligation, or claim was remitted, forgiven, written off, or waived, the fiscal year in which it was written off, forgiven, or waived, the act of parliament under which the claim arose, and so on and so forth, that those actually add significant clarity to the information that we're opening up to the public. So for those reasons, I hope that members will support.
Thank you. Ms. Tester-Dirksen, would you like the floor?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to my colleague for the proposed amendment. Just a question, and this may be going to our guests who are here today, about how the registry will actually appear. Like if someone is searching, information that is covered under privacy regulations would be redacted, not appear. I'm curious to how this is actually going to look to someone who's accessing the registry.
Thank you for the question. So we are still waiting for the full text of the bill to be completed, and from there we can start to investigate how we would implement the registry. So at this time we don't have the concrete plans of how the registry would be implemented, but we understand from the text of the bill that it will have certain requirements, and that might include searchability, for example, and we would ensure that that is put in place. I think you understand that we have to work with multiple departments to gather the information. So the Treasury Board Secretariat would be the central house to have the database and the searchability tools. But we would then gather the information from departments across the government and ensure that it meets the requirements of the legislation.
Thank you. Yeah, it becomes a question just because the whole issue around redacted text seems to be at the forefront of a lot of people's minds right now just because of what's going on south of the border. Obviously, very different situation here. But it's just something I highlight as to what type of message it sends in a higher level way when there's material text that's redacted versus text that just is not there, thus not indicating that something has been redacted. So that's the point I'm making. Thank you.
Just enlighten us, Ms. Tesser-Dirksen, in terms of what's the debate in south of the border that's related?
I was referring to the Epstein files, all the redactions.
Okay, all right. There you are. All right. Ms. Turnbull, I understand you have your hand up. So.
Just going to make two other quick points. I understand that these changes also would help align the new registry with broader public accounting practices and remove a misalignment between the registry and Part 2 of the Financial Administration Act. Mr. Thomas, could you, I guess I should say Mr. Pompey, could you clarify that for us and just confirm that?
Yeah, so right now what you have available in the Public Accounts Volume 3 is aggregate information about all debt deletions. So what this proposed amendment proposes to include is all types of debt. So in the previous version of the bill, remissions, for example, were not included. So we've ensured that, the proposal ensures that all types of debt are included, which matches the same kind of reporting that you see in Volume 3 of the Public Accounts.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll just look for any comments on this side. All right. So then looking, shall G2 be passed by this committee?
Yes.
Yes, I declare that this passed as well. I'm hearing no opposition to it. That is passed. Just 1 second, please. Up next is G3, and I'm going back to Mr. Turnbull, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll introduce or move this amendment as well. That Bill C-230 in Clause 1 be amended by adding after line 7 on page 2 the following. Quote, exception 3, despite subsection 2, the President of the Treasury Board may exclude from the registry any information that, in their opinion, would be inappropriate to make publicly accessible for reasons related to the protection of confidential, personal, or sensitive information. Establishment of registry. 4, the registry must be established within 18 months after the day on which this section comes into force, and on the day that it is established must include information relating to each debt, obligation, or claim referred to in subsection 1 that was remitted, forgiven, written off, or waived, after the day on which this section comes into force, during the fiscal year to which the public accounts most recently tabled in the House of Commons relate. Maintenance of registry. 5, within 90 days after the date on which the public accounts are tabled in the House of Commons, the President of the Treasury Board must update the registry to include information relating to each debt, obligation, or claim referred to in subsection 1 that was remitted, forgiven, written off, or waived during the fiscal year to which the tabled public accounts relate. For greater certainty, 6, for greater certainty, for the purposes of this section, a debt or obligation owed to a Crown corporation is not a debt or obligation owed to His Majesty, and a claim by a Crown corporation is not a claim by His Majesty, period. End quote. So maybe I'll just make a couple of points. I know Mr. Lemire and the Bloc had an amendment and some concerns when it came to confidentiality and privacy. I think government shares some of those concerns, and this is sort of our remedy for that. I think what we've done is asked to not include Crown corporations, to be completely clear that they don't owe debts to the Crown. Therefore, they would not be included. The amendments also are designed to reduce any legal, privacy, or commercial risks associated with the creation of a public registry from an infringement of privacy and confidentiality. Amendments relate to prospective applications are designed to ensure the registry only deals with debts deleted after the coming into force of the provision. And amendments related to timing and frequency establish a timeline for implementation and auditing. So those are some of the reasons why we think this is the right way forward. Notwithstanding, I know some concerns that Mr. Chambers expressed to me to assure him that the President of the Treasury Board would not, I think without good reason, redact or withhold information from the registry. It's only to protect confidential, personal, and sensitive information, like when a partner is named in a partnership, that information could be disclosed through naming the company itself, and that, so there's probably, I can think of some good reasons why some information from time to time would need to be withheld from this registry, but only insofar as we need to protect individual citizens and their confidentiality. And they have the right to, I think we all take that responsibility seriously, that sensitive information, personal information should not be disclosed through a public registry, because those individuals could then get targeted. And I wouldn't want to see people targeted unnecessarily harmed or put in harm's way by something that I think is a very good initiative to increase transparency when it comes to deleted or waived or written off debts or obligations. Thanks very much, and I hope we'll get your support.
Thank you. First, I have a point from Ms. Tester-Dirksen. You have the floor.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. I just want to point out that we did receive a letter from the Privacy Commissioner that expressed no major concerns, but a minor concern with respect to a point of uncertainty in Section 25.1 sub 2 sub E, which talks about the registry including information relating to a debt that includes any other information that the President of the Treasury Board may require. And the Privacy Commissioner expressed some concern about not having enough information or context about what information could be requested pursuant to that paragraph. I'm wondering if anyone here could comment on that, how far that request or the nature of the information requested could extend.
Any takers or volunteers on that? Yes. No, Mr. Papiel, you have the floor first.
Okay, thank you. Including a provision that allows the President of the Treasury Board to add other information just gives the government flexibility to adapt the registry over time as needs evolve, without requiring new legislative changes, while ensuring the minimal amount of transparency is there by the requirements that are built into the legislation. The Privacy Act permits disclosure of personal information if it is required by law, so if the disclosure is in accordance with legal obligations of the FAA, it is permitted.
Are you satisfied? Thank you very much. Suivant, c'est M. Lemire, s'il vous plaît. Puis après ça, M. Chambers. Oui, M. Lemire.
Mr. Lemire. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The president of Treasury Board is an actor, clearly, who is political. However, when it comes to confidentiality, I have some reservations because it's a fairly wide-ranging section here, and I'm still reflecting. Indeed, the Privacy Commissioner, who doesn't see too many issues with this bill. However, for me, there's an issue from a taxpayer's point of view. It seems that large corporations benefit from debts being forgiven or written off, like Chrysler and GM. So my question is either from the witness or from the opposite side. So revealing names, for instance, in the case of GM and Chrysler, could these names have... So if the president of Treasury Board had felt that it would be a competitive disadvantage for Chrysler and GM to be named, could their names not have been disclosed to the public? And there's also Stellantis, Volkswagen. These are huge corporations, examples where the government did not want to reveal the contracts, which for reasons which are clear. But in a case like what we're talking about here, is it possible the government might want to hide some elements of information for political reasons because the contract did not have the benefits it should have had? And so there would be less accountability to Canadians. So that's my reservation. So Chrysler, GM, if this amendment had passed, would those names not have come out to the public? Who'd like to answer? Perhaps the proponent of the amendment, and then maybe the witnesses.
And what's hard for me to determine off the top is exactly what is required in terms of the naming, right, in the registry. But I think the language in the amendment suggests it wouldn't be an arbitrary decision to me that there is definitions of what is confidential, personal, and sensitive information. But I'd like to ask the officials to perhaps clarify whether my interpretation is correct here, because I hear what you're saying. You're basically saying, how do we protect against a political party, whatever one happens to be in power, that appoints a president of the Treasury Board from withholding information from this registry? And it's a good question. So could the officials speak to, I'm not sure who's most appropriate, but I'll let you take the question. So, is it possible that the president of the Treasury Board could just make an arbitrary decision to exclude information here, or based on definitions that are embedded in law already that would indicate what counts as protection of confidential, personal, and sensitive information?
Thank you for the question. So I can add that the exception is discretionary and targeted, not a blanket exception. So you used the word arbitrary. I wouldn't say it can be arbitrarily used or used. So, for example, there might be situations involving national security as well, where names have to be withheld, for example. I would add that the exception applies only where publications would be inappropriate, so that's the scope in the bill, due to confidentiality, personal or sensitive information, and the default remains disclosure. Okay? It is not possible to anticipate every sensitive scenario in legislation. This exception provides for cases which cannot be exhaustively defined in legislation and provides some ability to not disclose sensitive information. The authority would rest with the President of the Treasury Board, which would ensure that there's a clear and accountable individual available for any decision made while allowing for consistent application across government. And of course, the decision remains subject to parliamentary and public scrutiny. I would further add that we do have the full disclosure of information through the public accounts. It is at an aggregate level, but there's a further second set of information in aggregate as well available.
So I take a little bit of solace in the answer there that the default is disclosure, but how do you define what is inappropriate, and how do you define what is considered confidential, personal, and sensitive information? Do those have strict definitions? It sounds like inappropriate is a little bit more discretionary. But I assume in legislation, and I'm almost positive that I know this, but I don't know where, so I hesitate to say anything untrue here. But I'm sure there's definitions embedded in federal statute that include confidential, personal, and sensitive information. Is that not correct?
With apologies, I don't know the legal basis on that enough.
Chair, maybe we could ask the legislative clerk if we can clarify that. Just, I think it would go to some length to help comfort Mr. Lemire.
The legislative clerks are not here to speak on the contents of the bill, I'm afraid. So they're here to guide us. It is up to the distinguished members of this committee and officials to propose ideas and solutions and outcomes.
Okay. Well, I will say I know that we have legislation that protects private information in Canada. I worked on it when I was sub PS to industry. We tried to update it and unfortunately weren't able to do that to the degree that we would have liked. But the point is, I know that there's embedded definitions of private information and confidential information in that act, which is PIPEDA for short. So I would suggest that it's very clear to me and very kind of common sense that well known here that there's some pretty rigorous definitions of what those terms mean, which protects against arbitrarily using this to just redact or withhold all kinds of information from the registry.
I'll look to Mr. Chambers for comments on this, please.
Thank you. Perhaps a couple questions would be helpful in order to form an opinion. The sole basis for holding some information off the registry could not be solely the Income Tax Act, because we are amending Section 241 of the Income Tax Act to make it permissible to disclose information. I have that. Do I understand that correctly? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And so, and just because it was brought up, there was a letter from the Privacy Commissioner that I'll summarize to some degree, but after the review, the quote says, my office is therefore of the view that potential impacts to privacy, if at all, would be minor. So I read that as if there is a proposal or a desire to withhold some information, that the reason for which to do so would have to be over and above just the fact that there would be private information disclosed. Is that a fair assessment? Like, for example, we talked about during when we reviewed the bill that every corporation has a registry, whether you're federally registered or provincially registered, and that you could uncover the directors and in some cases shareholders of those corporations by just searching the corporate name. Therefore, publishing a corporate name in the registry on its face is not a violation of privacy. I just want to make sure that that's an understood, make sure I'm understanding that correctly, but that's not the interpretation of officials.
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah, no, that is very helpful. If there is a redaction made, would other information appear on the registry and just the information proposed to be redacted, or would there be no entry at all? I'm thinking of, would there be a line item that says, it's blank on the name, but here's the amount and here's the act under which the debt was waived, forgiven, or remitted, or written off?
So the way it's written right now, the President of the Treasury Board may exclude from the registry any information that in their opinion would be inappropriate to make publicly accessible. So it could be in part or in whole.
I guess the question would be, is how would you envision parliamentarians or the public knowing that a redaction has been made?
The only thing I can add is that further information is available in the Public Accounts Volume 3 in aggregate, or there could be the decision maker is available for parliamentary scrutiny as well.
In theory, a parliamentary committee could still compel that information to the best of your knowledge. Is that correct? Even if a redaction has been made?
With apologies, I'm not an expert on that.
Does the chair have a view on that? If a parliamentary committee requested information about a redaction to be made public, it would be in the committee's right to do so?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Okay. Yes, we can call for any information. We just have to know about it.
And I guess the final question would be, if a decision is made to redact, would the reasons for that redaction be made available, or could it be made available to parliamentarians, and what would be the mechanism to make that information available?
Right now, there's nothing specifically written in on that.
Mr. Chambers, let me just clarify. I mean, it's long precedent. We've had the law clerk in here on several occasions to remind, inform committee members as well as parliamentarians of the unfettered right that committee parliamentarians have through the committee to call for any documents from the Government of Canada. We've had some debates on that. This committee has managed to come to consensus around it, either in public or in camera. But of course, committees do have that unfettered right to do so, and that would remain. The challenge, of course, would be knowing what to ask. And I understand. I take the point that's being raised, as I suppose you could deduce from the Public Accounts Volume 3 the gross amount with whatever was redacted or made public, and determine if there is a large number that's unaccountable for. It would obviously be better to have a line that at least indicated there was an amount that was publicly available without a name, just to give us a sense of what was going on behind the scene.
And if I may, look, I believe that it is reasonable to request some discretion on disclosure for a whole bunch of different reasons, and I don't think we need to envision all of them today. If there was some acknowledgement, and I don't think we should try to draft on the fly, but if there was some acknowledgement or an ability for the government to indicate the number of entities that meet the threshold, which in theory is available today through order paper questions, etc., that there would be an ability for parliamentarians to understand how many redactions have been made from the registry, right? So if we agree that we can get the number of entities that are meeting the threshold and we have the registry, then in theory someone can figure out whether there's been a redaction. If we can get some agreement that that information is readily available, I'm open to providing some discretion, but that we underscore that the default is to disclose, which I think we've heard, which is good. But I'm open to suggestions on that from my colleagues or the government. I just think it would be important for parliamentarians to know when a redaction is made, which would then provide the ability to hold that decision maker accountable. I don't know if that needs to be written in a legislation, but some agreement would be helpful on that front.
Thank you. Mr. Lemire has indicated he'd like the floor. Mr. Lemire, à votre tour.
Mais en ce sens-là, effectivement.
Well, in that regard, indeed, there's some things that still bother me. For instance, when the name is withheld from the registry, will it be redacted? Will it be withdrawn so that we don't even know that there could have been a name? I propose that I prefer redaction. And then the justification for the redaction. I've no problem with the fact that personal, sensitive, or confidential information could not be revealed. National security had been invoked in the case of Stellantis, Honda, or Volkswagen. So I just want to make sure that names never appear in the registry. And then it's as if the entity in the transaction never happened. So is there any way we include the names, but if they cannot be revealed, they would be redacted with a justification? What do you think of that?
Mr. Turnbull, please. Just 1 second, Mr. Turnbull. Est-ce que c'est une question à Mr. Turnbull? Okay,
Is that a question for Mr. Turnbull?
Well, I was going to make a comment. I don't know if I have an answer to that, but similar to the point that Mr. Lemire just made, I had assumed when reading this bill that and the amendments that we were proposing that in this registry that there would be, maybe my assumption, that there would be very few cases where there would be no information provided at all. I mean, that you heard the officials say it could be in part or in whole, so I guess that raises the concern. But in my mind, if there is information to be disclosed, then there is a line item that's in the registry. I could envision the name. Maybe the name is occasionally redacted for a very good reason. I don't know. I actually think that the name is probably the least likely. Maybe I'm wrong on that. So maybe I'll just leave that for a moment. But I guess the point is you have a line item no matter what with information that is disclosed and that anything that is missing has obviously been redacted. And if there is an empty line item, then you'd be able to see sort of it would imply a redaction was made of a whole line in the registry. That gives you some clarity on how much has been redacted, where specifically what information. I mean, it kind of answers the question. It's not like a blackout of redaction, but I think it's the same thing, right? It's an empty field in the registry itself. I guess what I'm wondering is that implied by the legislation and the proposed amendments that we're discussing? And it's hard for me to determine that without asking perhaps the officials that are here. Is that your understanding? Is there, if a name happens to be not disclosed for sensitive reasons or personal or confidential information being withheld from the registry, I assume that there would still be an entry, the amount would be there, and other information that we've added here that would be required would be disclosed. So you just have a line item without a name. And then I'm sure we can envision some other cases where some of the other information, where the name might be included, but other information may not be disclosed.
Thank you for the question. Isabelle Brault for the CRA. Although I'm only authorized to speak to the powers of the Minister as Minister of National Revenue, perhaps a few general comments. The parliamentary debates and discussions at committee can be used to determine what was the intent and the scope of legislative provisions that are to be applied. And so that is one tool. However, I suppose that greater clarity in the text could also be deemed by this committee as preferable. I'll stop there.
So if I may then, to me, that was the intent that I read into this. So we could clarify here in committee, which would inform CRA's practices in the future, right? So I don't know, Mr. Chambers, if what I have proposed and Mr. Lemire, whether you think that that's satisfactory, but I think I would be agreeable to that.
Mr. Chambers.
Perhaps just a question about not moving a sub-amendment, or not moving a sub-amendment, but a question. So in Part 3, despite subsection 2, the President of the Treasury Board may exclude from the registry any information. Exclude to me is like delete. Mm-hmm. I think Mr. Lemire, when he was speaking, if the word exclude was redact, to me, that implies that there is information that is still in the registry, but is like blacked out, but that there's, in theory, an entry. To me, I think that probably gets you what you're looking for. So maybe a question for officials. If the word exclude became redact, would that mean that it would effectively be like blacked out on a screen versus being unsure of whether there was an entry there at all?
Thank you for the question, Mr. President. We do not have expertise as legislative drafters, and so if there's ambiguity, the committee might find it more prudent to specify and have it on, to specify in those words. We've gone to the extent of our expertise on this, and what we're at liberty to share at this moment. Thank you.
Mr. Turnbull, could I try some wordsmithing here? All right. So I see a little bit of an impasse here, and I'm wondering. I'm going to do this publicly with my team here of drafters and experts. If we add at the end, comma, but nonetheless requires such a disclosure to be marked as redacted, comma, but nonetheless requires such a disclosure to be marked as redacted, but nonetheless requires such a disclosure to be publicly marked as redacted. I think that captures where we're at. I'll repeat that again. But nonetheless requires, and someone can write this down because I'm doing this off my head. But nonetheless requires such a disclosure to be publicly marked as redacted. And just hold on 1 second. You guys, everyone think about it. Okay, I'll just hear some comments on this. If it's worth suspending, we can do that. So let me turn to, I'm going to turn to Mr. Turnbull first. Mr. Turnbull, I should take your temperature first on this.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess what I was proposing, I think amounts to the same thing, but maybe you disagree. But I think if you have this is a table, right? This is a table with columns of information that are labeled. And if there's an input field under, one of the criteria that's in one of the columns, it's empty. And that means that there's been a redaction because all the information is required to be disclosed by default. So essentially, as long as we clarify that all of the missing information has to be identifiable, I think that's the issue here, right? Is we want anything that's been redacted or not disclosed to be identifiable. I think you're suggesting, Chair, that perhaps it says redacted in that input field, but I'm saying if it's empty, then it's actually been redacted. The only exception to that could be in cases where they didn't have the information, but I think that's going to be almost impossible given the limited scope of this. So I think, perhaps we give direction to the CRA today in our proceedings, and that we all agree unanimously that all input fields have to be included, and that information not provided means there was a redaction. And then I think we're good. So that would be my humble suggestion. Again,
Yes.
It's about the will of the committee, Chair, I realize.
Agreed. And as you know, I can't make amendments or sub-amendments. I'm just throwing out a few ideas. So it'll be up to the committee to accept and move on. Monsieur Lemire, à votre tour, s'il vous plaît.
J'ai évidemment.
Well, I have trouble understanding that the information is going to appear in a table and that a box will remain empty. I have no problem for us being able to get the information. And if not, well, the expression blacked out applies because it's not explained how the information is made public. As well, Mr. Chairman, to add to your thoughts, perhaps we can have another amendment which speaks to a justification or a rationale It could be the protection of sensitive, personal, or confidential information. But it's important to indicate that information has been blacked out. Give the rationale because Treasury Board felt the information could not be disclosed. We're not preventing the minister from not divulging the information.
I appreciate trying to get some clarification. I thank the chair for his helpful suggestion, as well as my colleague from the block, who I think are trying to figure out a way to make this palatable. From my perspective, I think it's a reasonable suggestion. If that was formally moved as a sub-amendment, I think that would be welcome.
Monsieur Lemire, avez-vous des...
Monsieur Lemire? So do you have a sub-amendment to propose at this point? Well, I think we should add, as you said, the information could be redacted, comma, with a rationale or justification.
I see the time. I think what I'm going to do is bring this meeting to a conclusion. This will give parties an opportunity to discuss this a little bit further. I don't see an impasse here, but by the time I suspend, agree to language, get it translated, we'll be well past our time. So, with the committee's permission, I will adjourn this meeting, and I'll have parties work on this, and we'll come back and pick this up with Mr. Lemire, likely with a sub-amendment to the amendment. Ça marche? Yes, Mr. McKinnon?
So just to clarify, when we resume, we have the sub-amendment moved, or will he?
We're going to work on that.
Okay.
But I see this as kind of a friendly exercise here, so I'll probably begin the next meeting hearing from Mr. Lemire to see if he has language that the committee can agree on. Does that sound reasonable? Oh, yes. Pardon me, Ms. Kuzi.
So to clarify, we will continue. That will be the next order of business at the next meeting. Will be to continue this exercise.
Well, that's. I would want to consult. I mean, I don't know what the officials are like. I had not planned on picking this up till after Easter. However, this is going much quicker than I thought it would. I would like to get it done. But there's a few things I'm talking to the government side as well on a motion that is outstanding. And oui, Monsieur Deltel, peut-être c'est...
I'd just like to remind colleagues of what I said 2 weeks ago at our last meeting, that we would be next Wednesday, we'll have the minister here and the mayor of Laval with regard to the situation the city of Laval is dealing with. So we'll debate that on Wednesday.
And that's the issue I was talking with some of the government members on, about how we are going to proceed with that. So I got a couple decisions to make on Wednesday. Mr. Chambers, I might have you back here Wednesday to try to resolve this in conjunction with Mr. Deltel. So for now, I'm going to adjourn this meeting and sort this scheduling out with the clerk, and you'll be notified as soon as possible. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.